What happens when the woman you threw away returns as the one person you can't afford to ignore? Imagine being told you're not good enough, that your dreams are trivial, and your presence is a stain on a powerful family's reputation. You're quietly erased from their world, but then, years later, you walk back into that world, not as a ghost of the past, but as the bride of a man far more powerful than they ever were. This isn't just a story of revenge, it's a story of rediscovery, of reclaiming your worth, and forcing those who broke you to witness your unbreakable rise. The invitation lay on Clara's reclaimed woodwork table, a stark rectangle of ivory cardstock amidst the joyful chaos of her art studio. The air, thick with the scent of turpentine and linseed oil, seemed to thin around it. The embossed sterling family crest, a severe, ostentatious eagle clutching a quill, felt like a brand on her skin. The Sterling Foundation Annual Gala for Children's Literacy. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, swallowed by the cavernous silence of her Soho loft. For 5 years, she had been a Sterling. For 5 years, she'd helped plan this very event, her opinions on color palettes and floral arrangements politely heard, and then summarily dismissed by her mother-in-law, Beatrice. Clara was the quiet, artistic wife, a pretty but ultimately unsuitable accessory for their son, Mark. Her passion for painting was a charming hobby. Her desire for a small, independent gallery was unbecoming. Her inability to produce an heir in their preferred time frame was a silent, damning failure. The divorce had been as sterile and efficient as a corporate merger. Mark, his spine made of jelly when it came to his mother, had explained it was for the best. "We just want different things, Clara," he'd said, his gaze skittering away from hers, unable to meet the hurricane of hurt in her eyes. The truth was, his family wanted a different thing for him, and she was not it. The day the decree was finalized, the Sterling family lawyer, a man with the warmth of a tombstone, had looked at her with undisguised pity. She was no longer a factor, an irrelevant footnote. In the 2 years since, she had rebuilt herself, brushstroke by painful brushstroke. She poured her grief, her rage, and her quiet resilience onto canvases. The loft, once a symbol of her failure to fit into Mark's world, became her sanctuary and her battleground. Her art, once timid and apologetic, grew bold. Jagged lines, deep, bruised colors, portraits of women with shadowed eyes and defiant jaws. A small gallery took a chance on her, and to everyone's surprise, her first solo show sold out. She wasn't Clara Sterling, the failed wife, anymore. She was Clara Hayes, an artist whose work resonated with a silent, unseen part of the city. A warm, solid presence pressed against her back, and strong arms wrapped around her waist. Alexander Thorne rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze falling on the invitation. "I see the past has sent its regards," he murmured, his voice a low, comforting rumble. Alex was everything the Sterlings were not. Where they were legacy, he was innovation. Where they were cold stone, he was tempered steel. A tech mogul who had built his empire from nothing, he saw the world not as a set of rules to be followed, but as a system to be understood and, if necessary, dismantled. He had walked into her gallery 6 months ago, his attention captured not by her, but by a painting, a raw, visceral piece titled "Echoes in an Empty Hall." He'd stared at it for a full 10 minutes before turning his intense grey eyes on her. "Who hurt you enough to create something this beautiful?" he'd asked. It was the first time anyone had seen her pain, not as a weakness, but as a source of strength. "I'm not going," she said, her body rigid in his embrace. "There's no reason to." "Isn't there?" He gently turned her to face him. His touch was always questioning, never demanding. "You're one of the artists they're honoring this year. They're showcasing a print of your work. It seems they find your hobby less charming and more profitable now." The irony was nauseating. The foundation had purchased one of her prints in a blind auction, and now they were parading her name, her maiden name, as a testament to their patronage of the arts. They probably didn't even realize who she was. Or worse, they did, And this was some kind of power play. It would be a statement, Alex continued, his thumb stroking her cheek. Walking in there not as who they remember, but as who you are. And who are you in this scenario? She asked, a sliver of her old insecurity surfacing. The billionaire benefactor escorting the charity case. His expression hardened, not with anger, but with a fierce protectiveness that still took her breath away. I am the man who is incandescently proud to be with the most talented, resilient, and beautiful woman in this room. And if anyone in that ballroom dares to see you as anything less, they'll be dealing with me. She knew he meant it, but the fear was a cold knot in her stomach. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was Beatrice's kingdom. The whispers, the condescending smiles, the dismissive glances, they were her weapons. Clara had been a casualty of that war once before. They ignored me for 5 years, Alex. They erased me. Why would I voluntarily walk back into my own haunting? Because you're not a ghost anymore, Clara, he said softly. You're the one who's going to do the haunting. He tilted his head, a slow, dangerous smile playing on his lips. It was the smile that had graced the cover of Forbes, the one that competitors saw in their nightmares. Besides, he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, I have a vested interest in the Sterling Foundation's portfolio. Let's just say I'm considering a very significant donation. It's always good to survey the terrain before an acquisition. The final word hung in the air, layered with meaning. He wasn't just talking about charity. She looked from his confident, steady gaze to the arrogant eagle on the invitation. The knot in her stomach didn't dissolve, but it tightened, transforming from fear into something else, something like resolve. She had spent years letting them define her worth. Maybe it was time she showed them how wrong their valuation had been. Fine, she said, her voice stronger than she expected, but I'm choosing the dress, and it's not going to be beige. The ballroom at the Pierre was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Diamonds glittered like frost on the necks and wrists of women in designer gowns, and the air hummed with the self-congratulatory buzz of New York's old money elite. At the center of this universe, holding court, was Beatrice Sterling. She was a vision in a severe navy blue gown, her silver hair coiled in an impeccable chignon. A polite, predatory smile was fixed on her face as she accepted compliments on the evening's success. Her son, Mark, stood beside her, looking every bit the handsome, vacuous heir. He was with his new fiancée, a woman named Vanessa, who was a carbon copy of every other Sterling-approved woman, blonde, from a good family, and with an opinion that never strayed from the consensus. He laughed at something a portly banker said, a hollow, practiced sound Clara remembered well. His sister, Chloe, a sharp-edged woman with a penchant for gossip, was flitting through the crowd, leaving a wake of whispers. Clara stood with Alex at the arched entrance, momentarily paralyzed. The scene was so familiar, it was like a recurring nightmare. The scent of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume, the precise timbre of the string quartet, the way the chandeliers cast a golden, unforgiving light on everything. It was a stage, and she had forgotten all her lines. "Ready?" Alex murmured, his hand a warm, steady anchor at the small of her back. She took a deep breath, pulling her shoulders back. She was not the same woman who had trembled in these halls. The dress she had chosen was a deep, defiant crimson, a slash of color in a sea of muted jewel tones and safe blacks. It clung to her figure, a testament to the strength she had found not in a Pilates studio, but in hoisting heavy canvases and wrestling with her own demons. Her hair was down, a dark cascade over her shoulders, and the only jewelry she wore was a pair of simple, elegant diamond studs, a gift from Alex. "Let's make our entrance," she said. They stepped through the archway. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. They were just another couple arriving late. Then, a woman who had once been on a charity committee with Clara paused, her champagne flute halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened. She nudged her companion. A ripple of recognition, of disbelief, spread through the room. The low hum of conversation did not stop. But it changed. It fractured, faltered, and then reformed around a new, shocking nucleus. Chloe was the first of the Sterlings to see her. Her perfectly painted smile froze, then curdled into a sneer of pure astonishment. She turned, her movements jerky, and grabbed Mark's arm. "Mark, you are not going to believe who just walked in." Mark followed her gaze, his own smile faltering. He saw the crimson dress first, a beacon in the crowd. Then he saw the face, Clara. But it was Clara transformed. The hesitant, almost apologetic posture he remembered was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. She was holding the arm of a man. He squinted. It couldn't be. Alexander Thorne, the one man his father and mother spoke of with a mixture of fear and loathing. The tech barbarian at their gilded gates. He felt the blood drain from his face. Vanessa, his fiancée, noticed his pallor. "Darling, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way," he muttered, his throat suddenly dry. Finally, Beatrice's gaze, drawn by the sudden shift in the room's energy, swept towards the entrance. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, landed on Clara. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something raw, pure, unadulterated shock broke through her icy composure. Then the mask slammed back into place. Her back stiffened, her lips thinned into a bloodless line. She had built her world on order, on control, on knowing who and what belonged. And this did not belong. It was a categorical error, a glitch in her perfectly curated reality. Clara felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. The whispers were now audible, a sibilant tide of gossip. "Is that Mark's ex-wife? What is she doing here? And with Alexander Thorne? I thought she'd moved back to Connecticut or something. My God, look at her. She looks incredible." She focused on Alex's hand on her back, a point of heat and reality in the surreal chill of the room. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. Enjoying the silence, he whispered. The string quartet, sensing the inexplicable lull, faltered mid-bar before awkwardly picking up the melody again, but the spell was broken. The comfortable rhythm of the gala had been shattered. Clara Hayes, the forgotten wife, the artistic misfit, the woman they had deemed unworthy of the Sterling name, had not just returned. She had walked back into their fortress on the arm of a king from a rival, more powerful empire. And in that moment, as she met Beatrice Sterling's cold, furious gaze from across the glittering expanse of the ballroom, Clara knew Alex had been right. She wasn't the ghost. They were, haunted by a past they thought they had successfully buried. The first salvo came from Chloe. She approached them with the predatory grace of a leopard, a venomously sweet smile plastered on her face. Mark and Vanessa trailed in her wake, looking like unwilling accomplices. "Clara, what a surprise," Chloe said, her eyes doing a slow, insulting sweep of Clara's crimson dress. "I didn't realize you were on the guest list." The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Before Clara could respond, Alex stepped slightly forward, a subtle but unmistakable claiming of the space. "She's with me," he said, his voice level and cool. He didn't offer a handshake or even a nod. He simply made a statement of fact, his presence alone a rebuke. He looked directly at Chloe, his grey eyes unblinking. "Alexander Thorne. And you are?" Chloe, who was used to men fawning over her or being intimidated by her family name, was momentarily thrown. "Chloe Sterling," she managed, her tone clipped. "Ah," Alex said, the single syllable loaded with dismissal. He then turned his full charming attention back to Clara, effectively erasing Chloe from the conversation. It was a masterclass in social warfare, and Clara felt a surge of warmth. In her old life, she would have been left to fend for herself, to absorb the barbs while Mark looked on uncomfortably. Mark finally found his voice, a strained, reedy sound. "Clara, you look well." "I am well, Mark. Thank you," she replied, her voice calm. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 2 years. The man she had once loved, whose approval she had craved, seemed smaller now. The handsome facade was still there, but she could see the cracks, the faint lines of stress around his eyes, the slight weakness in his chin that his mother's force of will had always hidden. I had no idea you'd be here," he stammered, glancing nervously at Alex, then at his fiancée. "The foundation is honoring my work," Clara stated simply, without malice or triumph. It was the truth, and its plainness was more powerful than any accusation she could have leveled. The work they had dismissed was now being celebrated in their own house. Vanessa, the fiancée, offered a tight, brittle smile. "Mark has told me so much about your art. It's so lovely that you have a hobby that keeps you busy." The condescension was a familiar poison. The old Clara would have shrunk, murmured a thank you, and felt the sting of shame. The new Clara let a small, genuine smile touch her lips. "It does more than keep me busy," she said, her gaze steady. "It bought my loft. It's a pleasure to meet you." She didn't offer a name, forcing Vanessa to exist only as an extension of Mark, a mirror of the role Clara herself had once played. Just then, a wave of people surged towards them, but their target was Alex. A senator, a real estate mogul, a tech journalist, all vying for a moment with the man of the hour. Alex handled them with effortless charm, but he kept Clara anchored to his side, introducing her not as his date, but as the brilliant artist, Clara Hayes. With every introduction, she felt her new identity solidify, the old one flaking away like dried paint. She caught a glimpse of Mark's face in the crowd. He was watching her, a complex, unreadable expression of regret and bewilderment clouding his features. He was seeing the woman he thought he knew being revered by people he was desperate to impress. He was seeing her through their eyes, and it was clear he didn't recognize the person he was looking at. Later, as Alex was locked in a quiet but intense conversation with the senator, Clara felt a chill and turned to find Beatrice Sterling standing beside her. "It seems you've done well for yourself," Beatrice said. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment, like a broker evaluating an unexpected stock surge. "I'm happy, Beatrice," Clara replied, her voice even. She refused to be intimidated, refused to let the old power dynamic reassert itself. Beatrice's eyes, like chips of ice, scanned her. "Happiness is fleeting. Security is what matters. I assume Mr. Thorne provides you with ample security." The insult was clear. She was a kept woman, having traded one wealthy family for another. A flashback, sharp and painful, hit Clara. It was from their last Christmas together. She had excitedly shown Beatrice a preliminary sketch for a large canvas she was planning. Beatrice had glanced at it for less than a second before looking up, her expression one of profound disappointment. "An artist," she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Honestly, Clara, what a quaint and utterly useless ambition. Your ambition should be your husband's success. That is your canvas. A sterling woman understands that." That memory, once a source of deep shame, was now fuel. "Alex provides me with respect, Beatrice," Clara said, her voice low and clear. "He sees my ambition not as useless, but as an asset. I'm sorry that's a concept you can't understand." Beatrice's perfectly sculpted face tightened. For the first time, Clara had not just deflected the blow, but returned it. Before the older woman could formulate a reply, Alex was back at her side, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his smile charming but his eyes cold as steel. "A lovely party. I was just telling Clara I'm so impressed with the Foundation's work that I'm considering making a substantial contribution to its endowment. A controlling interest, perhaps." Beatrice's composure finally cracked. A flicker of genuine alarm crossed her face. The Sterling Foundation was her domain, the source of her social power. The idea of a man like Alexander Thorne, an outsider, a disruptor, buying his way into her world and gaining control was anathema. He had just threatened her politely in the middle of her own ballroom. And he had done it with her former daughter-in-law, the woman she had cast aside, smiling at his side. This wasn't just a social appearance. It was the opening move in a much larger, more dangerous game, and Clara, whether she had intended to be or not, was right at the heart of it. The following morning, the Sterling townhouse on the Upper East Side felt less like a home and more like a corporate headquarters on the brink of a hostile takeover. The air in the formal living room was thick with tension and the faint cloying scent of yesterday's flowers. Sunlight filtered through heavy silk curtains, illuminated dust motes dancing in the charged atmosphere. Beatrice Sterling stood by the marble fireplace, her posture ramrod straight. She had not slept. The image of Clara, radiant and confident in that vulgar red dress, on the arm of Alexander Thorne, was burned into her mind. It was a strategic and social humiliation of the highest order. Mark sat slumped in a wing-back chair, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Chloe paced restlessly on the Persian rug, her phone clutched in her hand as if it were a weapon. "The entire city is talking about it," Chloe spat, swiping angrily through a gossip column on her screen. "Tech titan Thorne debuts artist Muse. They have pictures of her, looking like she owns the place, and of you, Mark, looking like a fool." "That's enough, Chloe," Beatrice said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is it?" Chloe whirled to face her mother. "He didn't just bring her there to embarrass us. You saw him. He was talking to Senator Rawlings for 20 minutes. He was practically holding court in our ballroom. And that final comment about a controlling interest in the foundation. That was a declaration of war." Mark finally spoke, his voice heavy with a dawning, sickening understanding. "It's about the Atherton deal." Beatrice turned her cold gaze to her son. "Explain." "Thorne wants to acquire Atherton Industries. We know that. It's the missing piece for his logistics empire, but we need it too. Dad's been working on that deal for months. It's the only way to shore up the West Coast division after those shipping losses." "And what does this have to do with Clara?" Beatrice demanded, though a cold dread was already coiling in her gut. "Who is the largest independent shareholder on the Atherton board?" Mark asked, looking at his mother. "Who holds the 15% swing vote that both we and Thorne need to close the deal?" The realization dawned on Chloe's face. Old man Hemlock, Robert Hemlock. He's been a recluse for years. No one can get to him. "Exactly," Mark said, leaning forward. "He's notoriously private, hates corporate raiders, and values legacy and family above all else. Thorne can't get to him with money. But Hemlock's one soft spot, his one obsession for the last few years, has been collecting modern art, specifically emerging New York artists." Beatrice's blood ran cold. "No." "Yes," Mark confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. "I checked this morning. His last major purchase 3 months ago was an original canvas by an artist named Clara Hayes. It's called Echoes in an Empty Hall." The room fell silent. The full, terrifying scope of the situation settled upon them. This wasn't about a jilted ex-wife getting petty revenge. This was a meticulously planned corporate maneuver. Alexander Thorne wasn't just dating Clara, he was leveraging her. She was his key, his beautifully unaware skeleton key, to unlock the one door that stood between him and a corporate victory that would cost the Sterlings dearly. "He's using her to get to Hemlock," Chloe breathed, a look of grudging admiration mixing with her fury. "An introduction, a private gallery tour. He's building a personal connection that we can't compete with." Beatrice walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain, staring out at the manicured street. All these years she had managed her family's legacy, protecting it from threats, excising weaknesses. She had identified Clara as a weakness, too soft, too artistic, lacking the ruthless ambition required of a Sterling bride. She had instructed Mark to cut her loose, and he had obeyed, as he always did. Now that perceived weakness had been weaponized against them by their greatest rival. The woman she had deemed worthless now held the power to indirectly influence the future of their company. The irony was so profound, so bitter, it tasted like ash in her mouth. "This is your fault, Mark," she said, her voice slicing through the silence. "You let her go. You should have controlled her, managed her hobbies. Instead, you let her build this separate identity." "My fault," Mark shot back, a rare spark of defiance in his eyes. "You're the one who told me she wasn't good enough. You pushed me to end it, to find someone more suitable like Vanessa, who has all the personality of a decorative vase." "Do not raise your voice to me," Beatrice snapped, her authority reasserting itself instantly. Mark deflated, slumping back in his chair. She began to pace, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. "This changes nothing. We will not be outmaneuvered. Chloe, I want you to find out everything you can about Robert Hemlock's habits, his charities, his grandchildren, anything we can use. Mark." She stopped and pinned her son with an intense stare. "You are going to talk to Clara." Mark looked at her in horror. "What? What could I possibly say to her?" "You will appeal to her sentimentality. You were married for 5 years. There was a connection there once. Remind her of it. Remind her of what it meant to be a part of this family. Find out what Thorne has told her. See if she understands what he's doing. She's a soft woman, an artist. She thinks in terms of emotions, not strategy. Make her doubt him. Plant a seed of distrust. Do whatever it takes." Her message was clear. Mark was to use their shared history, their intimacy, as a tool to manipulate his ex-wife for the family's gain. He felt a wave of nausea. He looked at his mother's unyielding face and his sister's scheming eyes, and for the first time he saw the Sterling family not as a legacy to uphold, but as a gilded cage. And he realized with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty that in casting Clara out they hadn't freed themselves of a weakness. They had lost the one person who might have been their saving grace. The days following the gala were a strange mix of exhilarating and unsettling for Clara. On one hand, her world had exploded. The art world, which had been cautiously embracing her, was now clamoring for her. Her gallery was flooded with calls. A prominent art critic requested a studio visit. The print of her work at the gala was suddenly the most talked-about piece of the night. She was no longer just an artist, she was a story. On the other hand, a shadow of doubt had begun to creep in. Alex's comment to Beatrice about a controlling interest had replayed in her mind. He was a brilliant, strategic man. He never said anything by accident. Was their public debut, her reintroduction to the Sterling's world, truly just about supporting her? Or was she a beautiful, convenient piece on his chessboard? The thought felt like a betrayal of the genuine connection she felt with him, but she couldn't shake it. She had spent 5 years as an accessory to someone else's ambition, and she would rather burn her canvases to ash than ever play that role again. Alex seemed to sense her disquiet. He was as attentive and passionate as ever, but she noticed a new intensity in him, a focus that seemed to extend beyond their bubble. There were more late-night calls, more encrypted files on his tablet. One evening, as they were sharing a simple dinner in her loft, the city lights twinkling below, she decided to confront the ghost in the room. "The Atherton deal," she said, her voice cutting through their comfortable silence. Alex paused, a forkful of pasta halfway to his lips. He slowly set it down, his grey eyes searching hers. He didn't feign ignorance. "What about it?" "I read the financial news, Alex. I know you're in a battle with Sterling Industries for it, and I know the key is a shareholder named Robert Hemlock." She watched his face carefully. "He's a major collector of my work, isn't he?" He held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Yes, he is." A cold knot formed in her stomach. "And that's what this is about? Was taking me to that gala, putting me back in their world, just a way to get to him? Am I your ticket to an introduction?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not guilt, but a deep, weary hurt. He reached across the table and took her hand. His was warm and strong. "Clara, listen to me. I walked into your gallery 6 months ago knowing nothing about you except what your painting told me. I saw strength and pain, and a fire that captivated me. Everything that has happened between us since then has been real. You have to believe that." "I want to," she whispered, her voice fragile. "But," he continued, his grip tightening on her hand, "am I a man who uses every advantage at his disposal to win? Yes. When I discovered who you were, who you had been married to, did I see an opportunity for a certain poetic justice? I won't lie to you. I did. The Sterlings are not good people. They build their empire by crushing smaller, better ones. And yes, when I found out that Robert Hemlock, a man I've been trying to get a meeting with for a year, was one of your most ardent collectors, I recognized it as a strategic advantage." He let out a long breath. "But it was never about using you. It was about integrating two parts of my life that had unexpectedly collided, my fight against the Sterling Empire and the woman I was falling for, who had been one of its casualties. I want you by my side, Clara, not as a pawn but as my partner. I want to win this deal, and I want them to see you standing next to me when I do." His honesty was both disarming and terrifying. He wasn't denying the strategic element, he was owning it, framing it as a shared victory. But the question remained, would she be a partner or collateral? Her internal conflict was interrupted a few days later by a buzz from the building's intercom. It was Mark. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't spoken to him privately in 2 years. She almost told the doorman to send him away, but a new, steely curiosity won out. What could he possibly want? She agreed to let him up. When she opened the door, he looked lost and out of place in the creative chaos of her studio. He was dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her first 6 months' rent, but he wore it like armor that no longer fit. He carried a large, ostentatious bouquet of lilies, which he held out to her awkwardly. Lilies, the flowers Beatrice always insisted upon for the townhouse. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, not inviting him in. Can I come in just for a minute?" he asked, his voice strained. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in, his eyes darting around the loft, taking in the huge, vibrant canvases leaning against the walls. This was her world, a world he had never once bothered to enter when they were married. "Your work, it's really something," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I know," she replied simply. He cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet room. "Clara, I came to apologize for how things ended, for everything. I was a coward. I let my mother run my life, our life. I see that now." She watched him, her arms crossed. Was this real, or was it a performance? "I miss you," he went on, taking a step closer. "I miss this, the real you, not the person they tried to turn you into. Thorne, he doesn't know you, Clara. Not like I do. He's a shark. He's using you for the Atherton deal. My mother figured it out. He's using you to get to Hemlock." So there it was, the real reason for his visit. A reconnaissance mission cloaked in a pathetic shroud of nostalgia. The wave of disappointment was so sharp it almost made her laugh. "Your mother sent you, didn't she?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. "She sent you here to play on my softness, to make me doubt Alex so you could save your precious deal." Mark's face crumpled. The lie fell away, leaving behind a raw, desperate truth. "Yes, but that doesn't mean I don't mean it, Clara. I do miss you. Seeing you at that gala, I realized what a monumental mistake I made. Thorne can give you money, but I know who you are. We had a life together." He reached for her hand. "It doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to be his weapon against us." Clara looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. The man she once thought she couldn't live without. She felt nothing. No spark of the old love, no flicker of pity. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. "You're right, Mark," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Thorne doesn't know the woman you knew, because that woman doesn't exist anymore. You and your family, you didn't break her. You burned her to the ground, and you're looking at what grew back from the ashes." She pulled her hand away. Now I think you should leave and take my mother-in-law's flowers with you." Mark left Clara's loft feeling like a man hollowed out. The sterile, corporate-approved scent of the lilies seemed to cling to him, a reminder of his mother's suffocating influence. Clara's words echoed in his ears. "You're looking at what grew back from the ashes." He had gone there on a mission for his family, but had come away with a devastating personal loss. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had failed to even recognize the person she had become. He reported the failure of his mission to Beatrice. Her reaction was not anger, but a cold, calculating recalibration. "Sentiment was a foolish angle," she declared, as if discussing a flawed business strategy. "The girl has been hardened by Thorn. She believes she's his partner. We need to change the narrative." The Sterling machine, wounded but not defeated, churned into motion. Beatrice began a subtle but vicious smear campaign. Whispers were planted in the right ears at country clubs and charity luncheons. Friends of the family made calls to influential journalists. The story that emerged was a tragic one. Poor, impressionable Clara Hayes, a talented but naive artist, had been swept up by the manipulative billionaire Alexander Thorn. He was using her, preying on her past hurt to wage his corporate war against the family that had once tried to help her. The Sterlings, the narrative went, were deeply concerned for her well-being. Clara felt the shift almost immediately. The tone of the articles about her changed. The term muse was now tinged with pity. An art blogger she respected wrote a piece questioning whether her recent success was truly her own or simply a byproduct of Thorn's influence and publicity machine. It was insidious, a poison seeping under her skin. They were trying to strip her of her agency all over again, reframing her strength as a new kind of weakness. Alex was furious. "I'll sue them for slander," he raged one night, pacing the length of her loft. "I'll have my legal team bury them." "No," Clara said, stopping him by placing a hand on his chest. "That's what they want. They want you to be the aggressor, the bully. It proves their point. We have to fight this another way." Meanwhile, Mark was tasked with a new, more desperate gambit. Beatrice, realizing that sentiment hadn't worked, decided that perhaps a grand, public gesture of remorse might. They needed to show the world, and more importantly, shareholders like Robert Hemlock, that Mark was the repentant husband and Thorn was the interloper. A week later, Clara was at her gallery, finalizing the layout for a new exhibition when Mark walked in. This time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a reporter and a photographer from a major society magazine. "Clara, please, just give me 5 minutes," he said, his voice pitched just loud enough for the reporter to hear. Clara froze, realizing instantly that she had walked into a trap. This was a performance, and she was the unwilling co-star. "Mark, this is not the time or the place," she said, her voice low and tense. I know I have no right," he said, stepping closer. He looked genuinely anguished, a perfect imitation of a heartbroken man. "But I can't let this go on. I can't stand by and watch that man use you to settle a business score." The photographer's camera clicked, capturing her shocked expression. "I made the biggest mistake of my life letting you go," Mark continued, his voice thick with emotion. "My family, they were wrong. I was wrong. I was a fool who didn't appreciate the masterpiece I had until it was gone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's blood ran cold. He opened it. Inside was a ridiculously large diamond ring, far gaudier than anything she would ever wear. He got down on one knee. The gallery, which had been buzzing with quiet activity, fell utterly silent. The photographer's camera flashed, a series of blinding, intrusive strobes. "Clara Hayes," Mark said, his voice ringing with theatrical sincerity. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking you for a second chance. Be my wife again. Come home." It was a checkmate of emotional blackmail. In front of the press, she was being offered a fairy tale ending, the remorseful prince begging his lost love to return. If she said no, she wasn't just rejecting Mark. She was rejecting the narrative of forgiveness. She would be the cold, unforgiving woman who chose the evil billionaire over the man who was publicly humbling himself for her. Beatrice's strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. Clara stared down at him, at the absurdly large diamond, at the practiced pain in his eyes. A hot, white rage, purer than any she had ever felt, washed through her. They were trying to cage her again, to force her back into a story she had fought so hard to escape. She looked past Mark, directly into the lens of the camera. She thought of Alex's fierce belief in her, of the woman she had become in the quiet solitude of her studio. She took a slow, deliberate breath. "Get up, Mark," she said, her voice not loud, but carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through the silence. He faltered, his performance momentarily disrupted. "Clara." "Get up," she repeated. "You are not proposing to me. You are staging a scene for a magazine. You are not offering me your heart. You are using a ring as a prop in your mother's pathetic little play." She looked at the shocked reporter. "There is no story here. There is only a desperate business tactic. The Sterling family is not concerned for my well-being. They are concerned about losing the Atherton deal to a better, more competent competitor." Then she looked back down at her ex-husband, who was still kneeling, his face a mask of disbelief. "The answer is no, Mark. Not now, not ever. You didn't appreciate the masterpiece you had? You're right, but you're still mistaken. The masterpiece wasn't me. It was the life I could have built, the woman I could have become if I hadn't spent 5 years shrinking myself to fit into your family's narrow little frame. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an actual masterpiece to hang." With that, she turned her back on him, on the camera, on the entire sordid spectacle, and walked toward the far wall of the gallery, leaving him kneeling alone in the wreckage of his family's last, desperate gambit. The story of Mark's failed proposal, meant to be a public relations coup for the Sterlings, backfired spectacularly. The reporter, sensing a far more compelling story than the one she'd been fed, printed Clara's side of it. Her powerful, unapologetic rebuttal to Mark's stunt was quoted in full. She was no longer a victim or a pawn. She was a queen defending her territory. The narrative had shifted definitively in her and Alex's favor. Public sentiment, especially among women who saw a reflection of their own struggles in her story, was overwhelmingly on her side. But the victory felt hollow to Clara. The incident had dredged up all the pain of the past, and, more importantly, it had crystallized the one question that still haunted her relationship with Alex. He had told her he wasn't using her, but she was, undeniably, a central part of his strategy. Where did the strategy end and his feelings begin? She needed to know everything, the full truth, without varnish or evasion. That night, in the quiet of his minimalist penthouse overlooking Central Park, she confronted him. The city glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars, but the mood inside was somber. "I need you to tell me why, Alex," she began, her voice steady. "Not the corporate answer, not the soundbite about poetic justice. I need to know why you are so determined to defeat the Sterlings. What did they do to you?" Alex looked out the floor-to-ceiling window for a long moment, his reflection a ghostly figure against the skyline. When he turned back to her, the confident mask of the billionaire was gone. In its place was a vulnerability she had never seen before, a deep, old wound. "They destroyed my father," he said, his voice low and raw. He sat down on the leather sofa, and she sat beside him, giving him the space to speak. "My name wasn't always Thorne," he began. "It was Theron. My father, Michael Theron, owned a small but innovative robotics company back in the late 90s. He was a brilliant engineer, a visionary. He developed a new kind of automated sorting system for warehouses that was 10 years ahead of its time. Sterling Industries, even back then, was a logistics giant. They wanted his technology." He paused, the memory clearly painful. "My father refused to sell. He believed in his company, in his people. So Sterling Industries, led by Mark's father and with Beatrice pulling the strings behind the scenes, decided to break him. They started a rumor that his technology was faulty. They poached his top engineers with exorbitant offers. And then the final blow. They engaged him in acquisition talks, got access to his proprietary designs under a non-disclosure agreement, and then pulled out of the deal, claiming financial irregularities. 6 months later, they released their own new sorting system. It was my father's design, barely modified. Clara felt a wave of sickness. They stole it. They stole everything, Alex said, his voice thick with remembered anger. We were buried in legal fees we couldn't afford. My father's reputation was ruined. The company folded. We lost our house. He was a proud man, Clara. The shame of it. It broke him. He had a heart attack a year later. He was only 49. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. After he died, my mother and we had nothing. I put myself through college on scholarships and loans, working 3 jobs. I swore to myself that one day I would be so powerful that no one like the Sterlings could ever touch me or anyone I cared about again. I changed my name to Thorn, a tribute to him, the thorn in their side I intended to become. I built my company with one goal in mind, to be better, faster, and more ethical than them, and to one day beat them at their own game. He looked at her, his grey eyes shining with unshed tears. The Atherton deal is the culmination of that promise. It's the final piece. Taking it from them isn't just about business. It's about justice for my father. It's about proving that his legacy wasn't a failure. Now she understood. The relentless drive, the strategic brilliance, the cold fury he reserved for her ex-family. It was all born from a profound and righteous grief. And me? She whispered, the final, crucial question. When you found out who I was I just a ghost from their past that you could use? He turned to her fully, taking both of her hands in his. When I first saw you, I saw a fellow survivor. I saw it in your art before I ever knew your name, the pain, the defiance, the refusal to be broken. It resonated with a part of me I keep hidden from the world. When I learned your connection to the Sterlings, it felt like fate. Like the universe was finally aligning. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering and raw with sincerity. I won't deny that your connection to Hemlock is a strategic asset, but you, Clara, are not. You are the reason the strategy matters. Winning is one thing, but winning with you by my side, showing them that the 2 people they tried to crush are now the ones they can't defeat, that's not just victory, it's redemption. He lifted a hand and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. But the choice is yours. If you want me to walk away from this, to leave the Sterlings alone, I will. You are more important to me than my revenge. She looked at the man before her, his empire, his ambition, his entire life's work, and knew he was laying it all at her feet. He was giving her the ultimate power, the power to choose. In that moment, all her doubts, all her fears dissolved. She wasn't a pawn. She was his queen. No, she said, her voice filled with a strength that came from a place of absolute certainty. You don't walk away. We see this through. We win. Together. The battle for Atherton Industries reached its endgame. The Sterling camp was in disarray. Their public smear campaign had failed, and Mark's disastrous proposal had made them look both foolish and manipulative. Alexander Thorn, meanwhile, was riding a wave of positive press, portrayed as a dynamic innovator standing up to a corporate bully with the fiercely independent Clara Hayes by his side. The final piece was Robert Hemlock. Alex, through Clara, had secured the one thing no amount of money could buy, a private visit to Hemlock's estate in the Hudson Valley. It wasn't framed as a business meeting. The invitation was for Hemlock to personally show Clara his collection, which included 3 of her paintings. Alex was invited to accompany her. They drove up on a crisp autumn afternoon, the trees ablaze in shades of crimson and gold. Hemlock's estate was old, elegant and understated, the antithesis of the Sterlings' gaudy opulence. Hemlock himself was a sharp, witty man in his late 70s with eyes that missed nothing. He and Clara talked about art for 2 hours. He spoke of her work with a genuine passion and a deep understanding that touched her profoundly. Alex, for his part, barely spoke of business. He listened, asked intelligent questions about art and legacy, and spoke of his own father's belief in building something that lasts. He wasn't selling a deal. He was revealing his character. As they were leaving, Hemlock walked them to their car. "You know, Thorne," the old man said, his gaze shrewd. "The Sterling boy's father has been calling me twice a day for a month. Sent me a case of scotch so rare I'm afraid to drink it. He talks about profits and mergers and market share." He then looked at Clara, a warm, paternal smile on his face. "You and your young man, you come here and talk about passion and legacy and what grows from the ashes." He paused, looking back at Alex. "I'll be voting my shares with you at the board meeting next week. My father always told me to invest in people, not just balance sheets." It was a quiet, decisive victory, the checkmate. News of Hemlock's allegiance leaked almost immediately, sealing the deal. The Sterling board was in turmoil. Their stock price dipped. The Atherton acquisition, which was meant to be their salvation, was now irrevocably lost. Beatrice Sterling, however, had one last card to play. It was not a corporate move, but a deeply personal, venomous one. She called Clara's personal cell phone, a number she could only have gotten through illicit means. "I hope you're proud of yourself," Beatrice's voice hissed, devoid of any of its usual polish. "I am, actually," Clara replied calmly, standing in her studio, the afternoon sun warming her face. "You have destroyed a family, Clara. Our family. The family that took you in. Mark is devastated. This deal, it will have consequences. Layoffs, reputations ruined, all because you couldn't let go of the past, because you attached yourself to that vulture." It was a final, desperate attempt at manipulation, an appeal to a guilt Clara no longer felt. "Let me be very clear, Beatrice," Clara said, her voice as sharp and clean as a palette knife. "You destroyed your own family when you chose legacy over love, power over people. You destroyed Mark's integrity when you sent him to lie to me, and you tried to destroy my life when you decided I wasn't good enough. The only difference is I refuse to stay broken," she continued, her voice rising with a righteous fury she had suppressed for years. "Alex isn't a vulture. He's a man who is rebuilding what people like you took from his family. This isn't about revenge for me. It's about standing with a man I love and respect, a man who values me for exactly who I am. The consequences you're facing are not my fault. They are the result of your own actions, coming back to you after a very, very long time. You are finally reaping what you have sown." She hung up the phone before Beatrice could reply, her hand trembling not with fear, but with the exhilarating release of a truth finally spoken. The last chain had been broken. The following week, the acquisition of Atherton Industries by Thorne Consolidated was formally announced. It was the top story in every financial journal. Alexander Thorne was hailed as a genius. The Sterlings were forced to issue a humbling statement about refocusing on core assets. It was corporate speak for a massive defeat. That evening, Alex didn't want to celebrate at some fancy restaurant. Instead, he came to her loft with a bottle of champagne and 2 paper cups. He stood in the middle of her studio, surrounded by her canvases, the dark pained works from her past and the new, vibrant, hopeful ones she was working on now. He raised his cup. "To my father, Michael Theron," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to Clara Hayes, the woman who paints with the colors of the sunrise after the darkest night." They drank, the cheap champagne tasting sweeter than anything she'd ever had. The ghosts of the past were finally silent. The war was over. And in the quiet, sun-drenched space of her own making, surrounded by her work and the man who saw her true worth, Clara knew she was finally, truly home. 6 months later, the Clara Hayes Gallery in Chelsea was packed. The energy was electric, a stark contrast to the stuffy, judgmental atmosphere of a sterling gala. Here, the conversations were loud, passionate, and focused on the art that adorned the walls. It was the opening night of Clara's new solo exhibition, entitled Metamorphosis. The works were a departure from her earlier, darker pieces. While the same emotional intensity was present, the canvases were now slashed with vibrant, defiant colors, brilliant yellows, deep magentas, and serene blues. It was the art of a woman who had been through the fire and learned to dance in the flames. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a massive diptych. On one side was a muted, fractured portrait of a woman with shadowed eyes trapped behind what looked like gilded bars. On the other side, the same woman emerged from the darkness, her face turned towards a source of light, her expression one of fierce, joyful freedom. Its title was The Sterling Cage and the Thorn Key. Clara, dressed in a simple but elegant deep blue dress, moved through the crowd, not as a hostess or an accessory, but as the celebrated center of it all. People didn't ask her who she was wearing. They asked her about her brush technique, her inspiration, her vision. Alex stood near the back, watching her. He was not the center of attention tonight, and he reveled in it. He was simply Clara Hayes's partner, and it was the title he wore with the most pride. His victory over the Sterlings had reshaped the logistics industry, but he knew his greatest acquisition was the partnership he had built with this incredible woman. The quest for revenge that had driven him for so long had been transformed into a foundation for love, a shared history that now bound them. Across the room, Clara saw a familiar figure lingering hesitantly by the door. It was Mark. He looked thinner, his expensive suit hanging slightly off his shoulders. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary sadness. Their eyes met. He gave her a small, sad smile and a slight nod, a concession, an apology, a final goodbye, before turning and disappearing into the night. She learned later that he and Vanessa had called off their engagement, and he had taken a lesser role in the now downsized Sterling Industries, finally stepping out from under his mother's thumb, albeit into a much smaller shadow. Beatrice, she had heard, had withdrawn from New York society almost entirely. Her foundation was still solvent, but her power was gone. She was a queen without a court, a ghost in her own townhouse. Clara felt a gentle touch on her arm and turned to see Robert Hemlock. "My dear," the old man said, his eyes twinkling as he gestured to the diptych. "You have not only painted a masterpiece, you have lived one." She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "I had a good muse." Her eyes found Alex across the room, and he raised his glass to her. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed, Clara and Alex stood alone in the silent gallery. The paintings seemed to hum with a life of their own in the quiet. "So, what's next for the brilliant artist?" Alex asked, wrapping his arms around her. She leaned back against him, looking at the vibrant, hopeful canvases that represented her future. She had once been a footnote in someone else's story, a ghost in a gilded cage. Now she was the author of her own narrative, her life a wide, unpainted canvas full of infinite possibility. "I think," she said, a slow, happy smile spreading across her face, "I'm just getting started." Clara's journey from a forgotten wife to an unbreakable woman shows us that our worth is never determined by those who refuse to see it. It's forged in the fires of our own resilience and painted with the colors of our own passion. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest victory isn't about revenge. It's about rebuilding your life so beautifully that the past has no choice but to fade into the background. What did you think of Clara's final confrontation with Beatrice? Let me know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of empowerment and redemption, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories that will stay with you long after you've finished listening. Thank you for watching.